Hello and welcome to the next part of our first-person narrative tutorial. This particular episode is going to cover adding sound effects to interactive objects. So at this point, if you revisit the project, you should have it set up so that when you walk up to an interactive object, it displays the name of the interactive object, and if you click it, the game knows that you've activated or interacted with the object, you can see, but it just doesn't really do much more besides print to the console. So we're going to work on adding more feedback, specifically with audio today. So let's go ahead and stop the project, and let's go to our scripts directory and go ahead and open up the interactive object script. Now remember, this is the script that's just applied to this cube. You'll see it has the interactive object script, and it has a default display text. So anyway, open the script up in your script editor, and we need to figure out how to make it play a sound effect. Well, this interact with function is part of our interactive interface. So we know that when the player interacts with our, in this case, interactive object, its interact with function will get called. So we just need to insert some code here to play the sound effect. I suppose in order to do that most easily, it'll help if we go ahead and add an audio source component to our interactive object. So on that very same object that has the interactive object script on it, go ahead and add an audio source component. And let's see, I guess we need to go find a sound effect for our object to play that will plug into this audio clip slot. So if you check out the notes at the very end, I've added a link to a light switch sound from Freesoundorg, and I think this is going to work pretty well for us. So one of the things with Freesound, it's a great website for lots of recordings that are licensed with the Creative Commons, but you do have to create an account and log in. So I'll go ahead and log in real quick. Alright, and now I can actually download this light switch sound. You can listen to it. It's short, it's simple. It works really well for what we want to do, which is just have a sound effect, a quick simple sound effect when you click this generic interactive object that we've made mainly for testing. If you you don't want to use this sound effect for everything in your game, but it'll work for this, and it might work for a lot of things that you wind up wanting to do. So a sound effect is a new category of asset. So I'm gonna go ahead and create a folder, and let's see, what am I gonna call it? I'll just call it audio, and open that up. And inside of your audio directory, since we can imagine maybe having different types of audio, say music or sound effects, I'll make another directory called sound effects. Now, this is just the way I'm going to organize my project. You may not want to get this granular with your folder tree, but I at least recommend one directory for your sound effects, or sound and music together. Anyhow, just drag the file that you downloaded into this new directory in Unity to add it to your project. I'm actually, okay, well, I'll drag it in here, and it's kind of got a goofy name because I already have this file on my computer in the same directory that I downloaded it to. So I'm just going to delete that extra one business. And the rest of this is referring to a specific sound on freesounds.org, which is okay because when I go back to use, I'm going to want to credit the author of this sound effect, and this info will actually make it easy to track down that sound effect. If you want to change the name, make sure you keep the link of the sound effect so that you can find it easily and add it to your credits later. Anyhow, now that I have a sound effect, I can go to my audio source on my interactive object here, which is this cube, and I can drag this in as the audio clip for this audio source. And because play on awake is checked, as soon as I start my game, it will play the sound. It did. It's good that the sound's working. It's bad that it's playing on awake because that's not the functionality that I'd like. So I'm going to go ahead and uncheck that. All right, let's head back to code where we can actually tell the game exactly when we want that sound to play. So I'm going to make a variable, a field, a private field for my audio source. So private audio source, and I'm just going to call it audio source with a lowercase a. So I'll hit tab to select that. Then I'll type semicolon, and now I have just an empty placeholder for an audio source. So I need to actually initialize this field with the audio source component that happens to be on this game object. So the way to do that is to use getComponent. I can search this game object. I can search through all of its components for one that's of the type audio source and stash that into this variable that I've created. So I'll do that inside of the start. Actually, it's a good idea to use getComponent in the awake function. So go ahead and start typing awake, hit enter, and autocomplete or IntelliSense should finish it for you. And remember, this is all blue. That means this is a special Unity method that gets called as soon as this object is awake, which happens before start. And it's good to put getComponent initialization stuff in awake in case you need to do anything with those components in start. So you want to make sure you don't use them until they've been initialized. So I'm going to do the initialization stuff here in awake, which is like the pretty much first thing that happens with this script. So I'm going to say that audio source with a lowercase a equals getComponent angle bracket, and inside of the angle brackets I type in the type of component I'm searching for, which in this case is audio source with a capital A. And don't forget your open close parentheses, which is just the syntax for every method in C#. Okay, so that's all it takes. Now whenever I use this variable, the game understands that I mean to take action with this particular component, because this is the audio source that's on the same game object that my interactive object script is on. Alright, so now when the player presses the interact with button, I will go ahead and play my audio clip. So you just type audio source with the lowercase a dot play, and that should do it. Let's just test it out. So save, Control S, go ahead and go back to Unity, run the game. It takes a minute to compile. Alright, so let's see. I'm going to click the sound, and there we go. So it's working, and now you can kind of tell it actually works every time I press the interact button, which is the left click button. And one thing I want to point out is this warning that we're getting all the time now. It says there are 2 audio listeners in the scene. There should only be exactly 1 audio listener in the scene. Well, audio listeners you can almost think of as like microphones. And since this is a 3D game, we want, if there's an explosion that happens, we need to figure out how to make it sound. Should it sound like it's happening to the player's left? Should it sound like it's happening to the player's right? Should it sound like it's happening behind the player, in front of the player? So there's a positional audio system in Unity, and it gets out of whack if it doesn't understand what position to listen from. And that's what this error is about. It's saying there's actually 2 audio listeners, so there's almost like 2 microphones in the scene, and we just need 1. It can only be 1 at a time so that it understands what position to make the sound like it's relative to. So the reason for that is we start the scene with a main camera game object. That's just the default template for new scenes in Unity. But the rigid body FPS controller prefab from standard assets, if you expand it, actually has another main camera as a child. So the camera has the audio listener, and that's why we've got two of them. So since this is the camera that we're actually using, let's go ahead and delete this one, at least for now. So go ahead and delete the main camera that is not part of your rigid body FPS controller. So delete this one, keep this one. So I'll go ahead and delete that. And then just make sure you have clear on play selected here in your console. That's important, otherwise you will have a hard time understanding when you fixed a problem. And so when I run the game now, these errors will clear, and if the error is not happening anymore, it won't come back. If it was still a problem, it will come back. So you can see that the error went away. I can click it, and now the game understands exactly how that sound should sound when relative to positional audio. When I click it, it should happen like right in front of me because the camera is rendering that object right in front of it. Alright, so we've got sound effects in our interactive object, but I think at this point we might imagine using lots of interactive objects. So it's probably a good idea to make this a prefab so that you can just go in and place several of them. So prefab is going to be another new type of asset, at least outside of standard assets. There's prefabs in here, but we're going to start making our own prefabs. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to create a new folder called prefabs, and the way to make a prefab is to just drag the thing that you want to be a prefab into that folder. So it doesn't actually have to be called prefabs, but that's just an organizational step I encourage you to use. All you have to do to make a prefab is just drag the thing you want to be a prefab into anywhere in your project window. So anywhere inside of the assets directory here. And now you can see there's a prefab called interactive object. You get a little preview of it, and if I wanted to place more of them, I can just drag them into my scene, and there we go. So now there's two, and they both work, so that's cool. Okay, so there's one last thing I'd like to show in this video. We've set it up so that the interactive objects play sound effects, and we've made it a prefab so you can create lots of them. You can see that they are blue. That means it's a prefab. But I want to point out our script for interactive object here. It is pretty reliant on there actually being an audio source component on this game object. So just to demonstrate that, let's I'm going to delete the extra interactive object. Let's just focus on this first one. Watch what happens if I say uncheck the audio source, or you could right click on this and hit remove component if you wanted. So if I run the game like that and try to use this, well, it's actually not giving me an error. I thought it would give me an error. Let's try actually removing it then. Okay. Whoa, weird. That's strange. I don't know why. I'm surprised that it didn't just go away, maybe because it's a prefab. It's strange that it just says removed. I guess that's probably because it's a prefab. Okay, so now you can see I'm getting this missing component exception. There's no audio source attached to the game object, but a script is trying to access it. You probably need to add an audio source, or your script needs to check if the component is attached before using it. So since this is a scripting class, we should probably talk about some, one of the things I want us to focus on is making our code very user-friendly. So this is just leaving the door open for a foolish designer or another developer who doesn't understand what is required of this object to set one up that doesn't work right because they didn't put on an audio source, right? So we can actually, as programmers, make it more clear that it has to have that. And we could even put some error checking in if we wanted. I suppose what we could do here, if we wanted, is have a little null check. We could say if audio source is not equal to null. So only try and do it if there actually is one. But because I think I want them all to have an audio source, I'd rather they get the error and understand that something's wrong now. Now you can customize the error. So you could put in like a try-catch statement. I guess I can cover that. Why not? So if I type in try and hit tab, which is just the Visual Studio hotkey for generating this little try-catch code block, you could manually type it in if you wanted. And then I could move the audio source.play inside of the try-catch. And so I could say, try this. If there's a problem, handle it however we want. So you could just totally ignore it. Or if we wanted to give like a more specific exception or specific error message, we could throw like new system dot exception and then type in a message that's really explicit, so there's no ambiguity about what went wrong here. We could say something. I mean, the default error for this case is pretty clear, but we could say something specific like interactive object requires an audio source component. Something like that. We could, maybe you need to say something like missing audio source component. Something like that. Let's see, what is, we forgot to close parenthesis. Alright, so that would work. Let's just try that out and see what happens. I'll run the game, and now we should probably get a more customized error. You can see it says missing audio source component. Interactive object requires an audio source component. That will be pretty clear to our designers that they need that component on there. But I think we can go one step better and use something called requires component attribute to kind of enforce this reliance on the audio source component. So you can type up above the name of your class here, you type in brackets require component and then open parenthesis, and you have to tell it the type of component that you need. And to do that, you use the type of syntax, which is a C# syntax for referring to types. So type of audio source. So this means that this script requires an audio source component. Now, if I save this, watch what happens. So first of all, it's important to understand that if you already have one of these placed in your game, it's not going to change it. So even though oops, do I have an error? I may have a compile error here. There we go. You got two open parentheses, you gotta have two closed parentheses. Alright, anyway, sorry, save that. So it's important to understand that existing interactive object scripts won't require the component. If they're already placed, they're just going to remain how they were. But if I were to make a new game object, I don't know, I'll just call this something stupid like fire extinguisher, because I'm going to have a fire extinguisher in my game. and I were to add the interactive object script to it, because I want the fire extinguisher to be an interactive object. So I click that, and you will see that automatically, through adding that component, it went and added an audio source component. So now, once you add this, any new instance of this script will automatically have an audio source component added along with it. So the old ones won't, but anything going forward will require that. So if you are able to think of it from the beginning, that's a good thing. Otherwise, it's always good to add that as soon as you think of it, so that going forward no one messes it up. Alright, so that pretty much covers our sound effect added to the interactive object. If we can delete this fire extinguisher, it's just an example. We can go ahead and, so I kind of messed this one up by removing its audio source. It's a good time to show you a little bit about the new 2018.3 version of Prefabs. If I want to revert those changes so it goes back to the version that has the audio source configured correctly, you can select your prefab, click this overrides button, and you can see what's different. It says that on the prefab, the original, it has an audio source, and on this one the audio source has been removed. So I'm going to go ahead and hit revert all, because I don't want this change on my object anymore. And I definitely don't want to apply it to the prefab, which would then break the prefab. They'd all be broken. I want to revert it so that it's just back to the original definition of an interactive object. And if you can see, if I place another one in, it will come in with the audio source already hooked up. So they should all be fixed now. Playing my sound effects. Seems like it's all good to me. Alright, so I'm going to leave this video here, and next we can think about what else we can do with these interactive objects.